In the world of star cars, especially orange ones that fly through the air with flags on the roof, you can never go far without hearing the name Travis Bell. And I was so excited to get to hear his stories in 2020. So far, you guys have watched his videos over 8.25 million times. And so I wanted to compile Travis's top 10 car stories because he's certainly become one of our most beloved storytellers. So that's what we have today, Travis's top 10 car stories. But while you're here, be sure to download the ModFind app to support our current sponsor. ModFind is an enthusiast marketplace where you can buy and sell parts, tools, cars, anything related to the automotive hobby. So be sure to check them out and thank them for their support of VINwiki. But today, please enjoy Travis Bell's top 10 car stories.
There are photos of it dead in the desert underneath the Brontosaurus, and you're like, oh, there's an ambulance under the Brontosaurus. I am somewhat obsessed with the Cannonball Run. So is a certain person that runs an amazing app called VINwiki and an equally amazing YouTube channel, Car Stories. So about 4 years ago, I met Ed at the Cannonball Run reunion in Darien, Connecticut, knew who Ed was, had no idea if he knew who I was. I was just the idiot that owned the ambulance from the Cannonball Run. The ambulance is a 1978 Dodge Sportsman B200, and they couldn't have picked a worse vehicle and a worse year. And the reason why I say that is in 1978, the Dodge van had a major overhaul. They had a bigger turn signal, a recessed door handle, a larger rear taillight, and a completely different dashboard. Though it looks the same from 71 to roughly 77, 78 was a crossover year, and Brock Yates, Hal Needham decided to use a 78. Not only that, it's a sliding door with barn doors on the back, and a Sportsman with a sunroof, which is the hardest thing on God's green earth. I can find you as many 69 Dodge Charger Daytonas or Superbirds that you would like, but I beg of you to go find me a 78 Dodge B200. 6-window slider with barn doors. After being obsessed with the Blues Brothers and all these years of chasing down the Dukes of Hazzard stuff, it was a natural progression because the Dodge is a Mopar product to work our way through the Cannonball Run. I saw the Cannonball Run movie in 1981 at the Westlake Drive-In with my mom and dad on the big screen at the drive-in movie theater. And I was like, this can't be real. Like, this is the greatest movie, ever. It's got all these cars and the Lamborghini with the Hawaiian Tropic stuff, and they put one in the pool, and like, what a great idea. An ambulance across the country, like, oh my God. I had no idea it was a real thing, obviously. And I really had no idea through the early 2000s that it was a real thing. Like, I had no idea that the Cannonball Run actually happened. And with the evolution of the internet and everything, and Brock Yates' book, it happened. And I'm like going, man, this is cool. And then to find out that Brock and Hal drove the ambulance and Pam was the patient and Lyle Royer's the doctor. Like, they gave all the competitors in 79 a notepad and said, if anything happens, write it down. And then they took all that and turned it into a movie. And they already had success with Hal and Brock had success with Smokey and the Bandit. What could go wrong, right? So to find out that the ambulance was the same ambulance that they drove and then they filmed with, I was like, man, I got to go find this thing. I had already found the first General Lee. Why on God's green earth can't I go find the ambulance from the movie Cannonball Run? I didn't even know where to start, didn't know where to begin. I'd found out that they drove the ambulance. The ambulance was built in 79. They ordered it, the orange and the white, Spinnaker white and sunrise orange. You can order a van that ugly that year. They ordered it. They shipped it to Bill Mitchell's shop in Connecticut. He did all the suspension work and turned it into a race car, basically. They put a Dick Landy 502 big block and a quicker transmission in it. So it had an overdrive transmission, completely untested, but Hal and Brock came up with it at a bar on the Sunset Strip and said, Hal told Brock, you got to do it one more time. And they came up with the greatest vehicle in the history of road rally. because who is going to stop an ambulance? So they all show up at the Goodwife Shopping Center, and on April Fool's Day, they're going to take off and drive across the country. And everyone, and John Harrison will tell you, and a lot of the competitors from 79, they were afraid of the ambulance because it was such a great idea. And it sounds like a Winston Cup car, and it is just rowdy. And they've got a doctor, a real doctor, and a patient that's like, she's tied into just dripping all over herself. And what can go wrong? So it came time to go. And the ambulance pulls around back and click, click, and it goes about 50 feet and dies and won't start. And it was completely untested, and it had all the great stuff, but not enough know-how to make this thing go, go, go. So Hal Needham, of course, always walked around with $100 bills, and every time you see him, he has a big gold chain and never mind my Rolex kind of thing, you know. And he had $100 bills, and he said, I'm going to peel off $100 bills until someone here can get this damn thing running, because Hal had a pretty filthy mouth. And there was two good old boys that broke into an auto parts store in Darien, Connecticut, and got just enough parts to make the carburetor right to get the Holly 850 going, and they were gone. And that thing was on rails. And the original ambulance got pulled over in New Jersey by Mark Finnick, and they had let him go because the story that they tell in the movie is basically the same story that was told by Lyle Royer. They said they had to get the senator's wife to UCLA because she had cysts on the walls of her lungs. And that's what happened. So they drove it all the way across the United States, got to Effingham in Illinois. It started pissing transmission fluid, and all of this untested stuff finally came back to bite them in the tail. The longest story short is there are pictures of Brock and Hal covered in transmission fluid, because on one of those vans, you can kick the cover over and it exposes the engine below between your legs. And there is the dipstick hole right there. And they were pouring transmission fluid in it as they drove it across the country to get it to where it eventually died. It died at the Wheel Inn in the Palm Desert, and it is the same place in Pee-wee's Big Adventure where the dinosaurs are. And not only did it die, it caught fire and then died. And there are photos of it dead in the desert underneath the Brontosaurus. And you're like, oh, and there's an ambulance under the Brontosaurus. Not only is there an ambulance, but it's on fire. And, you know, Pam and Lyle are jumping out of this thing. This is on fire. It eventually went out and it didn't destroy the whole thing. But Hal Needham had to get to the Portofino Inn, and he's got a stack of hundreds, and he walks, this is a truck stop, and said, who owns the low boy out here? And these two good old boys said, that's us. Hal said, what's it going to take to get us into the Portofino Inn? And we don't want a DNF. Did not finish. So he peeled off just enough $100 bills, just like he did on the other coast. And there was a gap between the Brontosaurus and the flatbed trailer, the lowboy. And they had to get it onto there. And if there was photos of it on there and photos of it off of there, but there is a healthy gap. Hal Needham was the world's greatest stunt man. And this thing would still run, but it wouldn't run well. And that 3 or 4 foot gap off of the ledge that the Brontosaurus is sitting on, and where the truck is backed up, the flatbed, Hal Needham jumped the ambulance onto the flatbed, stopped it, they chained it down. Hal, Brock, Pam, Lyle, the 2 truck drivers drove into the Portofino Inn and towed the ambulance. To this day, I have no idea how they got it off the trailer at the Portofino Inn, but they did. So I was obsessed with this goofy ambulance. I thought it was the greatest thing on God's green earth. They had the greatest road rally vehicle. Why would you stop this thing? They had just enough stories, lights and sirens. They filmed the movie with the same ambulance. And then Hal Needham told me a long time ago, he said, if you ever want to lose a lot of money, buy a NASCAR team, which I agree with. Hal Needham owned Harry Gant's number 33 Skull Bandit NASCAR, whatever it was, Monte Carlo back then. And the reason why they called it the Skull Bandit was he co-owned it with Burt Reynolds, the Bandit. Hal had a side project with the Budweiser rocket car, and they were setting land speed records, but it was only a 3-wheeled car, so they did not officiate or include any of the land speed records because it didn't have 4 wheels. But you would see the Budweiser rocket car go down the Salt Flats, and it's now in the Talladega Motor Speedway Hall of Fame Museum. But then a few minutes later, you would see the Transcon Medevac right behind it. And Hal used it as a support vehicle for his efforts as the land speed record. So if there are videos of him out there, and there's the ambulance right behind it. It kind of fell into disrepair, obviously. Things lose interest. And Hal donated the ambulance when he owned his NASCAR team to the NASCAR Women's Wives Auxiliary, and they auctioned it off for a tax write-off for Mr. Needham. And they auctioned it to a flower shop in North Carolina. So they had a big block Dick Landy 502 X ambulance delivering flowers in North Carolina. And for me, I was like, I've got all this information. I can go find this thing. And to this day, I have no idea what happened to it after the flower shop, because these are disposable vehicles. If Bob and Billy Bob need a sixer, they're going to go crush the ambulance or crush the van and go get enough scrap money. It could still be in someone's backyard. If you know where the ambulance is, contact Ed, and then he'll contact me, and then it'll be another show further down the line. Anyhow, after a few years of looking, I had realized that I was not going to be able to find the original ambulance. I had wasted a lot of time looking for this thing. It wasn't as easy as the General Lee. So I had become friends with Brock Yates just by asking him all these questions about his ambulance. And he was always like, well, why would you want to build that thing? And why would you want to do this? And he thought I was crazy. But I had found the correct van, and so it was time to rebuild the Transcon Medevac. Unfortunately, I built it exactly how they did. I put the big block 502 in it. I put the Holly 850 in it. I put the overdrive. We use a Gear Vendors transmission, overdrive transmission. It has four-wheel disc brakes, Hellwig sway bars, Bilstein shocks. It will fly like the wind. It has radar jammers on it. A license plate flips. It's got a drone, a K-band drone in it. It is as bad, if not badder, than the original one. During the build, Brock's health started deteriorating, and he would always answer my phone call. And I would be like, gosh, I really don't want to bother him. Like, he's the same Brock Yates that did Diamond P Sports and Car and Driver magazine and announced the Daytona 500, and he's answering Travis Bell's phone calls. I'm like, what? I mean, where am I? Not even close. So I had no idea what the rear view mirrors were on the thing. If you look at pictures of it, it's got these little bitty dinky mirrors that you can't see anything out of them. But I was very anal about it, making it exactly all the way down to the correct gurney, the front air dam, everything, mirrors. Brock was always nice to me. I still have his phone number in my phone. And my final phone call to him, I said, Mr. Yates. And he's like, it's the disc jockey, big, loud, booming voice. I said, rear view mirrors, Transcon Medevac. How's the van? I said, yeah, the rear view mirrors, the two sides. Oh, yeah. 1974 Opel Manta 400 or Opel Manta GTs. Engelmann mirrors. And I was like, I've been looking for these things for years, like these. I looked at little 550 Spider mirrors off the Porsche. I looked at all these different things. And all I had to do was make one phone call to him. And he knew right away that they were Opel Manta 400 mirrors. And they are. They are. He was absolutely right. So I chased down a set of those. They're on the ambulance now. As the ambulance was complete and it started behaving itself, because this is highly untested, there's no reason why there should be a big block 502 in the front compartment of a 1978 Dodge van. The Cannonball Run reunion came around in Darien, Connecticut, and we were invited to attend. There was an evening where all of the original Cannonballers were going to tell their stories, their own car stories. And there's a night you would never miss if you were a fan of the Cannonball Run. So I drove out there, truck and trailer, and with the ambulance and the trailer, unloaded it. Of course, it was pissed off the whole weekend, but it made it to every place it was supposed to go. And that evening was the first night that I had met Pam Yates. And Pam Yates always told me that Brock's signature looked like a doctor, like it was very busy and very quick. And I had already met Hal Needham too, and I had Hal Needham sign the glove box door, and I had Brock Yates a few years prior sign the glove box door inside the ambulance. And I was only short Pam and Lyle. And Pam's standing right there in front of me, and she's looking at this thing that she had ridden in backwards, facing the wrong direction in 78, it was on, or in 79, and it was on fire, and she's got saline solution dripping down her arm, and her husband's going to get them all arrested. But it came a moment when we were to walk in for them all to tell their stories. And I didn't really know how to approach her, and it was Mrs. Yates, and blah, blah. I was just trying to, and she's such an approachable, nice lady. And I said, I need you to sign my glove box door. It was, said bye to a couple people, and it's one of those moments, car story moments, where it's dark out and the ambulance is under the light, and the light's coming in through the windshield, and she opens the door, and I hand her the Sharpie marker, and she looks down at her husband's signature and puts her hand on her signature, on his signature. And she said, this is the prettiest signature he's ever had on this thing. And of course, I'm ready to cry, and she's having a moment with it. And she didn't write Pam Yates, she wrote Lady Pamela on it. And that's what she's forever known for. So it's another one of those reasons why I believe vehicles have a soul, because some of these invoke emotion. You can blindfold me and put me in that vehicle, and I can smell it and know what I'm in. And she had that moment where all of the nightmare that I've had with this thing, with 14 years and $110,000, came down to that moment in a parking lot in the Darien, Connecticut library, where this lady had enough time to have some moments with her own husband. Ever since we did the Players Run and everything else in the General Lee, it's time to go put some miles on this thing. And I really now know why Hal and Brock both warned me about building it exactly as it appeared, because it didn't make it 50 feet in Darien, Connecticut, and then it almost burnt down in the Palm Desert. The same things in which they ran into, we have run into. We attempted to make the C2C Express in 2019. I'll be forever known as the guy who left Ed Bolian without a ride in New York City. But it's just, God dang that thing. So we improved everything we could. We modernized it. We got rid of all the nightmare Holly 850. We put fuel injection on it. We were throwing belts. We put a serpentine belt conversion on it. It was piss and gas because I had two gas. It holds 70 gallons of fuel. We replumbed it. We did everything to erase this DNF that I promised Hal Needham, and I promised Brock Yates, and I promised Pam Yates that I would erase the DNF that appears in Wikipedia and all the record books and Brock Yates' book. And now it has a DNS, because it did not start the C2C Express, and now it did not finish the 79 Cannonball. So fingers crossed, we are going to get it across the line, and Ed and I will finally finish what they started in 1979. In comes a Harvey, Illinois police officer. So I am a child of the 80s that grew up obviously loving television star cars and movie star cars. When all of this comes down, there were some great shows in the 70s and 80s, which we're lacking now. But the 80s and the 70s, the star car was its own character. It was its own thing. Some of them got more fan mail than the actors did. So throughout the 70s and 80s, with all these television star cars and movie star cars, it was the Blues Brothers. I mean, if anybody ever says, that always says Bullitt has the greatest car chase in the world, and the Italian Job, or whatever it's called, or the French Connection, and all these different car chases and car shows, but the Blues Brothers, for the amount of Dodge Monacos and things they got away with in downtown Chicago, they had to FAA certify a Pinto to be able to fly. When they dropped it, Pinto was dropped, and then it hits perfectly so they could see the Sears Tower and everything in the background. And the Pinto is FAA certified. I became obsessed with the 74 Dodge Monaco known as the Bluesmobile. I not only wanted to own one, but I wanted to do everything that the Blues Brothers did in theirs. So you're asking, and this is in 2005, not everybody had a cell phone in their pocket at that time, and you could kind of get away with a little bit more. But we built a true-to-life Bluesmobile, as good as we could get it, correct interior. Dan Aykroyd used it for the House of Blues grand opening in Cleveland. We had him sign it, and I live in Indianapolis, which is 3.5 hours away from Chicago, where it all happened. So we were on a mission from God. And we took it up there and figured, see what we can get away with. Our main goal back then in 2005 with the Bluesmobile was to drive through the mall. And the mall is the Dixie Square Mall in Harvey, Illinois. How on God's green earth? And this, if you go on deadmalls.com or a lot of the other, if you go on any of the abandoned websites for dead retail, you'll find the Dixie Square Mall. And it's not famous for anything good other than in 79, the Blues Brothers filmed in it and drove through it. And they say all the classic lines like disco pants and haircuts, and the new Oldsmobiles are in this year, and all these other terrific lines. I wanted to drive my Bluesmobile through the mall. So my friend Andy and myself, we went out on a scout mission, but we took the car with us on a trailer, just in case everything looked good. And you always kind of choose these dates where there'll be low police activity. So we chose Super Bowl Sunday to go and attempt to get into the mall. We didn't know if it was boarded up. We don't live anywhere near it. So Harvey, Illinois is not, I'm sure it's a nice place. Harvey, Illinois was not the best place to be at that time. So needless to say, we pulled into the mall parking lot, and there are trees that big around growing out of the asphalt, and it's an abandoned mall. It was abandoned roughly when the Blues Brothers got there, and they put all the decor up and everything. So we just walked to what would be the JCPenney's, and it was, all the boards were off, and it was basically wide open. We walked in, and of course there's glass there. It's abandoned retail. The first thing they do is just vandalize it all to death. So we walked into this mall, and the Bluesmobile's out on the trailer, and I was like, man, we can do this. But what we didn't rethink of is we did bring some generators because, of course, we knew there was going to be no lighting in there and some lights. But it had snowed, and there's no lights, and the skylights were all blown out. So there was ice and snow in the mall. So the hazards of driving through the mall, but then it's slick and a mess and whatever else, we moved some things out of the way and unloaded the trailer and put some generators. We walked down the mall and fired up the generators and put them in some of the storefronts, and we drove through the mall. And we're talking splashing and ice, and just, I've probably lost 4 years off of my life with the amount of asbestos that I inhaled that day. But there we went. So we knew it could be done, and it was very quick. You don't wear out your welcome when you're not in the greatest place on God's green earth to drive a car through a mall. So we put it back on the trailer and went home. But so then we had this idea, if we got away with that, the sky's the limit. Let's figure out where all the Blues Brothers filming locations were, because the car chase scene, it goes through everything that you do not expect it to, for the 6 corners of Cortland Avenue to out of the Toys R Us and through the mall, Phil's Beach in Harvey, Illinois. They drive across the beach and all these Route 59 and Rand Road and all these different crazy Lower Wacker Drive and these things. So I called 6 of my friends over the summer, because the Super Bowl had already happened, and say, hey, let's go and film and see if we can get away with driving the Bluesmobile everywhere the Blues Brothers did. And we're talking everywhere, including Cook County Courthouse, a federal fence driving across in front of the Picasso, and it's not good. So instead of trailering it up there, we drove the Bluesmobile, and then we bought a Miami County Sheriff car. Still had sheriff and everything on the side of it, and it had a 4.7 in it, or 4.6 in it that was knocking real bad, and they were going to run it, the sheriffs were going to run it in the demolition derby. And it's always kind of like the drag race, beat the cop or whatever else. We put a 4.7 in it, so we had a perfectly decaled up brown and tan Indiana Waffle Monster police car, and still said sheriff on the side of it. And so we had a white Nissan Titan and the Bluesmobile, and we went and got Universal Studios decals and magnets and slapped them on the side of the Titan, and then drove the sheriff car. And so we had a 2-car Escort and the Bluesmobile, and we drove straight to the mall. I forgot to mention that the Harvey, Illinois Police Department is in the parking lot of the Dixie Square Mall. Their helicopter pad is too. So we pull up, and the mall still looks terrible, and some of the big trees have been cut down, and it's still impossible. I mean, you're driving around tree stumps. And I just didn't even stop. I drove straight into the mall and then we parked the Titan outside with the Universal Studios stickers on it and the police car next to it. And it was dry. And so we moved they were doing some demolition inside. We moved some rocks out of the way, and it was on. And we had a free mall, no generators needed. It wasn't dark, and we were doing 70 miles an hour up and down and through the mall and sliding and through everything. And it's kicking up all this horrible stuff that we shouldn't be breathing, but that's why we do this. And in comes a Harvey, Illinois police officer. And everybody looks at me like I got the silver tongue, like I'm going to tell this guy that nothing to see here. It's just us people from out of state. He's from out of the country. We're just driving around in the mall doing, and we know where he came from. He came from the police department that's out in the parking lot, and the helipad's sitting there. And we parked basically on the helipad. I just started talking to him. I said, yeah, we're filming for you. How long are you guys going to be here? Oh, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Do you want to get your picture taken with the car? Would you do that for me? I'll be more than happy to take your picture with the Bluesmobile in the mall that we're not supposed to be here. Snap, snap, and about his way he went. And we drove through the mall basically the rest of the day, back and forth and back and forth. And everybody who went with us out of the Toys R Us, power slides, of course, some overcorrecting, hitting some walls and some weird things, but it didn't matter. And we got away with it not just once, we got away with it twice. So then we got our hotel room, and there's nothing we can't do at this point because we went across the 95th Street Bridge, and then we're like, that was a Friday and it turns into a Saturday. So the Blues Brothers, during their final chase scene, when all of the Monacos pile up, they're going down Lake Street and they hang a left on LaSalle. And the only reason why we know is because, at least because I wasn't from Chicago or Illinois at the time, and there, when the car slides, you can see LaSalle Street parking garage. All that it says real big. And so I'm like thinking, okay, if we can fly down Lake and LaSalle, we had taken the e-brake on the Bluesmobile to where it still worked. It's your left foot, and it would click, 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 but it wouldn't engage. It would fling back up. So you can spin the rear end around. It's like having an emergency brake on it. I said, if I can come down here at 60, 70 miles an hour on Lake Street underneath the L train and buzz this thing to hard left on LaSalle, if we can do this, we can get this final shot. Then they drive across, and then they go to Cook County courthouse, and the thing explodes and falls apart. And I'm thinking, what can we do? And it was the St. Jude's parade or something that day, that morning, where all the amazing Chicago police officers put on their dress blues and whatever else, and they're on the other side of town. And I knew we had one chance to shoot this shot. So sure as could be, we put the camera on the hood of the brown and tan Indiana sheriff car, put one inside the Bluesmobile, and as fast as we could, went down Lake Street underneath the L. And of course, when you hit the e-brake, the rear end locks up and it spins around and it's gone. And it's the prettiest shot in the world. But then, of course, your back tires light up and there's squeal underneath the L, echoing down, and we're gone. And there was not, and we did it at like 6:15 a.m. and there was not a police officer in sight because they were all marching in their parades with their white gloves. And we found them all later that day because we went to eat, and there was a bus full of police officers, and we're like going, nothing to see here. They wanted to get their picture taken with the Bluesmobile also. Everything that the Blues Brothers did in 1979, we did it too. So every street, from Lower Wacker Drive to the Schmad's house, to down the exit ramps the wrong way, across Phil's Beach, the lady that owns Phil's Beach in Wakanda, Illinois, let us drive across the beach again. There was one golden window, and it was that weekend, and we were able to recreate everything we saw. And then we drove it home. And if you Google right now or do a search engine right now for my Bluesmobile, we sold it. And their overseas karaoke is a big deal overseas. There was a Blues Brothers group, two Asian fellas, that needed a Bluesmobile for their karaoke thing. So they made me an offer, and if you search engine Bluesmobile in Japan or Bluesmobile Tokyo, that's my Bluesmobile. And they now do car shows, and they sit out there and song and dance and whatever else. And so my Bluesmobile is still alive and well in Tokyo. It's still autographed by Dan Aykroyd and Paul Schaefer, because Paul Schaefer was in the Blues Brothers band. And it lives on again and appears at countless Tokyo car shows or karaoke events. There is a saying where it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. and we had no permission. But at that point, you almost felt like you can do anything because we had just broken every law in the state of Illinois, lied to a police officer in basically his parking lot, saw all the other ones 2 days later at the parade that they were waving at, and we're like, nothing to see here. And we could have got the key to the city that day. But after all of the previous Star Car stuff in my life, and now to where we are today, man, it's just nothing you can't do with them. I mean, it is like having the key to the city. Like if you show up in a time machine at Universal, they will open the doors for you. Like, welcome, like, where you been? If you go to Chicago to the House of Blues, I saw a Casey and the Sunshine Band concert at the House of Blues in Chicago with no tickets, no anything, got an autograph just because I showed up in the Bluesmobile and drove it home with one wiper in a snowstorm back to Indianapolis. But it will get you, I don't know what you can unlock the doors with at Fort Knox with, but it's worth a try. And then I get this word that I am to deliver Jessica Simpson to this park where she's singing These Boots Are Made for Walking. In the realm of Dukes of Hazzard, in 2005, they released a Dukes of Hazzard movie. And pre-controversial flag and everything else under the sun, Jessica Simpson, Johnny Knoxville, Sean William Scott, they threw him a bone too. I sent them 80 wheels for the General Lee because I had accumulated a mini barn full of wheels in Indianapolis. They discontinued them in '84, and I could see them go by at 100 miles an hour and pull somebody over and say, hey, I'd like to buy the wheels off your car. It's usually on a Camaro or some old hot rod. They released this movie in '05, and prior to that, they had done a Batman movie, which I think was Batman Begins or Batman Returns or Batman Showed Up or whatever Batman it was. And that was the first time they introduced the Tumbler as the Batmobile. And so the Tumbler's cruising through downtown Chicago, which was Gotham City, and being chased by all these blue and white Gotham police cars and going through Lower Wacker Drive and through the underground and all over Chicago and through things. And Crown Vics are crashing into each other, and of course the Batmobile gets away as always. Little did anyone know those same blue and white Crown Victorias that said Gotham Police on them went down to Louisiana when they filmed the Dukes of Hazzard movie, and then they became Georgia State Patrol cars. So if you watch the Batman movie, whichever one it was, and then the 2005 Dukes of Hazzard movie, they're both Warner Brothers productions, and Warner Brothers simply recycled the Crown Victorias and saved some bucks and just moved them from Chicago down to Louisiana. They filmed in not only Baton Rouge, but they filmed in New Orleans, and it's bizarre to watch the Dukes of Hazzard movie take place because the General Lee will slide through New Orleans, and I think the stop lights in New Orleans are green, the outer round of them, but then it'll slide through a scene and come out and they're all yellow, and that means they're in Baton Rouge about 40 minutes away. So boy, the General Lee is pretty powerful as it's cruising 40 miles in less than a second. But some terrible acting and some bad editing later, we had the Dukes of Hazzard movie. MTV came along and they had a show called Your Picture Show or Your Movie Show or something where MTV would recreate a scene from your favorite movie. And they decided to pick the 2005 Dukes of Hazzard movie at the same time that it came out. A little promotion. Warner Brothers, thank you very much. And they are going to jump a General Lee. And the very first jump of the very first General Lee was at Oxford College, Saturday, November 11th, 1978. They jumped it at Emory University, Oxford College in front of Seney Hall. So MTV would like to recreate that, but they need permission from the college. And at that point, I was their kind of go-to because I knew people at the college and they realized how important that their property was to the Dukes of Hazzard. And so MTV asked me to approach them. I got permission from the school to jump a General Lee one more time in front of Oxford College to recreate the jump from '78 to promote the Dukes of Hazzard movie. But something that was never revealed on the whole thing is unless you were watching that jump from space, they removed the flag off the car. Oxford College, Emory University, gave them permission to jump the car, but that car was flagless the entire time, and it still went off without a hitch. Nobody got hurt. Nobody's ever said anything about it. But that was another instance that the flag was removed from the car. No harm, no foul. It was still the General Lee. So on back to the 2005 Dukes of Hazzard movie. In promotion, not only with this MTV thing that we jumped a car with no flag on it, nobody got hurt, no harm, no foul, Rhino Linings, of all people, were a sponsor for the Dukes of Hazzard movie. This epic masterpiece. And so they needed somebody to drive a General Lee across the country to promote the 2005 Dukes of Hazzard movie. So guess who they call that has a General Lee? So I shipped my car from Indianapolis to, I think it was San Diego area, where the Rhino Lining headquarters are. We had to be at the world premiere of the Dukes of Hazzard movie the next day. And so we did Knott's Berry Farm or something down there, and then we did the world premiere red carpet. That was on a Tuesday. We had to do the world premiere. We had to be in New York City for Good Morning America Friday for the premiere. So we did a promotion across the country and stopped at like every movie theater, everything from Los Angeles down through Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, all the way up the coast. And then I get this word that I am to deliver Jessica Simpson to this park where she's singing These Boots Are Made for Walking, right? I'm down here in this terribly running 1969 Dodge Charger that had just driven all the way across the country and vapor locked in Phoenix, and it was not good, but it's a road trip, and you make memories and you tell stories about them. And here comes Jessica Simpson, and she's going to get in the General Lee. And if you've ever watched her talk back in the day, she talks through her teeth like it's the weirdest. I can't even do it right. But she was with Lachey Guy back then. She had this little dog, and she came down the stairs and just turned and handed it to him, and like he took off like he knew what to do with the dog, right? So she gets in the car, and true to form, some bodyguard named Tiny puts her through the window, and she's pulling her shorts, and she goes, "Travis, these shorts are all up my rear end." And I go, "Well, I mean, you're Daisy Duke. I mean, come on, right?" So I drive her over to the park and deliver it to her, and she was good. She slid out the window and did all that stuff. And then we had to go to Madame Tussauds Wax Museum to unveil her statue of her as Daisy Duke. And we had a monster truck provided by Rhino Linings, the General Lee, and we're driving through Times Square in this mess, right? So this General Lee at that point is really pissed off after driving all the way across the country and decides to die in Times Square. And there's a little goofy box on old Mopars where you got to whack. It's an ignition box to get it going again. And they had called in from a local New York radio station. And my phone rang, and they thought I was still with Jessica Simpson for me to hand her an interview. And as I did, I thought it was the folks from Rhino Lining in the monster truck, and I had to get out and whack this thing to get this General Lee to start again. And I said probably the worst string of cuss words that I've ever said in my lifetime as I answered the phone, because I thought it was the monster truck, and went live on the air in local New York. And it was a flip phone, I remember, because it goes, I said, "Motherfucker, look, wait a second, this car won't run." and it was the radio station going live for Jessica Simpson. and you should have heard the disc jockeys. They were like, "Okay." And it was easily 15 seconds of cuss words. After they were done filming and Hurricane Katrina came through and it's a bit of a mess down there, I went back to the filming locations and found all the people that had supplied vehicles, and the Boar's Nest was this Moonlight Inn down there, and it was just kind of a cool place in Clinton, Louisiana. And Warner Brothers had left all the Crown Victorias behind. And I struck up a deal with the local junk man or the local guy there that for some reason had all the Crown Victorias. And I bought almost every blue and white Crown Victoria from the Dukes of Hazzard movie, full roll caged. And I don't have any idea why I keep getting in trouble with Crown Victorias, but we did everything that you can do in a full roll cage Crown Victoria. And then we took them back and plated them all and ended up selling them to a bunch of different star car museums. But we paid a whopping $800 a piece for full roll cage Crown Victorias and made multiple trips to Louisiana and brought them all home. They all ended up in museums and whatever else, but we kept one and just beat the snot out of it. There's videos of me in my backyard running it into the chain link fence, trying to do donuts and the thing. But it's a free roll cage Crown Victoria, and you can do anything you want to with it. No airbags. Everything is disarmed. And I really don't know what happened to the rest of them, but that one car, you can still see all the orange paint from where it slammed into a General Lee. You can see where it ran into the tumbler. And a lot of these cars are just completely recycled throughout their lives. One thing that is tough to say, we had a white one that was an Atlanta police car. And we made the license plate on the back of it said ATL POPO, Atlanta Popo. And then we had one of the Georgia State Patrol cars that we weren't going to sell, that we were going to keep. When we were buying the cars, we had just single car haulers. So two of us would go down, and then we would drive one home and bring the other. Like, these are full roll cage from Louisiana to Indianapolis, just down the highway. We actually got pulled over one time in Illinois with them on the trailer by an officer, and he thought that because of Hurricane Katrina and all the damage of the cars, we were stealing cars out of Louisiana and bringing them up the highway. Good for him, but we had enough paperwork to get us through. But on the back of one of the Georgia State Patrol cars, we put Georgia State Patrol, which is GA space ST space PO, which spells Gestapo, which flew through the BMV but was rather offensive. Jesus himself had pulled into the Shoney's parking lot, and it was incredible. VINwiki is all about car culture and the people in which you meet, and then they come here and tell stories about their own car culture. And it doesn't matter if Ed is here rattling off that he has an LP 572 hut hike with a 50 gate shifter or whatever, because I'm lost when it comes to that stuff. And then when you get Ed and Doug in a car together on a road trip, and both of them are rattling off car numbers about having a 45, 68, 52, and I'm just some guy that's a friend of theirs, we're all friends, and we're all car fanatics, and it's all about car culture. I decided to drive the ambulance in the Bandit Run, which is a thing put on by my buddy Dave Hall, who owns RestoreMuscleCar.com. And it's when all the Bandit Trans Am people and all the Trans Am enthusiasts get together and they go on a big road trip. And it is well put together, and there's some incredible people that are on a different car culture and a different group of friends, but they are awesome. And so they're all driving Burt Reynolds vehicles. Travis owns an ambulance that Burt Reynolds drove, so I'm there. So this started in Cleveland, and it went to Dayton, Ohio, then across Indiana to Pontiac, Illinois, and then up to LeClaire, Iowa. And believe it or not, the mighty ambulance made it. And the ambulance sometimes won't make itself or make its way out of the driveway. We were all sitting at a restaurant or a little diner in Pontiac, Illinois, because we're all driving Pontiacs, except me, I'm driving a Dodge. And sitting there with all of my friends. My friend Alan works at James Byer Dodge Ford something dealership in Iowa. Great people, but car people. And we all started talking about, since we're in Pontiac, some crappy cars, because that may be what you talk about in Pontiac, Illinois. But we ended up on, of course, the granddaddy of them all, the Pontiac Aztek. And the Aztek kind of took the cake for being a crappy car. And little did I know, the guy sitting to my left was the biggest Aztek fan in the history of that vehicle, and he is a buddy of mine, Dan, and I had no idea that he can do the same Ed, the same Doug thing where he can rattle off how many production with the gated manuals, LP58 with the tent out the back and the whatever else, and the Aztek, and I was like going, oh my God. But I didn't want to offend him because that's his culture, and I'm sure he has friends in his car community. Just as you know, there's a Mustang's going to peel out somewhere out of Cars and Coffee and go take out a crowd of people. The Aztek is a piece of crap, but he loves them. Alan and I started talking about crappy cars that we had growing up. And somehow everybody at the table had a Beretta, a Chevrolet Beretta. And I had a GTZ, a 90. The Beretta was the pace car at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And the Beretta was a home run for Chevrolet. But everybody at the table had a Chevy Beretta. And so of course, someone gets out their phone. We are doing a Smokey and the Bandit event, but there is a Beretta festival. And so my buddy Alan challenged me at the table that day that if I do not show up at the next Beretta Fest in a Beretta, that whoever doesn't make it gets a punch in the face. And that's a solid bet. Alan's not a big guy, but nobody wants a punch in the face. We go on and end up in LeClaire, and all the way there we talk about Berettas and didn't know there was a car culture of Berettas. Now, there's all kinds of things that bring even us together and bring all these people here to tell stories. But there'll be one person in your life that may have made you a car enthusiast. Mr. Rogers would say, take a moment to think about that one person that made you who you are today. So I say, take a moment to think about the one person that influenced you to be a car person. And Mr. Rogers would watch the clock. He said, I'll give you 10 seconds. And then he would say, well, that person is probably happy that you thought about them today. So the car culture not only goes through Pontiacs and Smokey and the Bandit cars and Berettas and Aztecs. We're all car people. That's how we end up here. Alan, of course, being at a car dealer in Iowa, bought a Beretta. And he would send me pictures of this Beretta. 3 months to go, click. He bought a 88 Iron Duke 4-cylinder maroon Beretta. But he's one step ahead of Travis. And Travis is going to get the punch in the face. Because Beretta Fest is in Branson. And Branson, Missouri is Sin City without the sin. I'm searching high and low and everywhere for a Beretta. And I knew that I had to outdo him and not have just another Iron Duke 4-cylinder Beretta. And I found a one-owner, an estate sale style Beretta that was in northern Indiana, V6 2.8 manual. Look at me doing some ed stuff. Digital dashboard, no sunroof, the holy grail of Berettas, but they want $5,000 for this Beretta. And if you are going to pay $5,000 for a Beretta with 3 days to spare before Beretta Fest, you've got problems. But that's what I'm down to. And I have to get a Beretta or it's a solid punch in the face. So I drove up there with the truck and trailer, and it's raining like the second coming of Christ. That should have told me something. There it is. They open the garage, and this brother has this Beretta sitting there. White, no sunroof, digital dashboard, manual 5-speed. Parking brake doesn't work. Don't worry about that. Starts it up. That yuck 2.8 sound, just the worst. And they are proud of their one owner, been in the family Beretta. We can't go for a test drive because it's raining. It's sitting there running. It's got an NXS CD in the CD player. And I'm like going, all right, dude, where are we at on this thing? I need $5,000. The brother that bought it new then shows up, kicking tires. Oh my gosh. I remember when I did this and XYZ. This is an heirloom at this point. Travis Bell shrewdly negotiated it down to $4,600. So I paid $4,600 for an 89 GTU Beretta manual digital dashboard, put it in the trailer, took it home, stopped raining the next day, backed it out, and it won't start. On the 2.8 V6, a little tough to get to the back spark plugs, and realized whoever worked on it last screwed up the spark plug wires. Find you set of spark plug wires for a 2.8 Beretta. There is an AutoZone in Indianapolis. That's the AutoZone warehouse, and Duralast parts are red and blue, but the box had been sitting there so long it was pink and purple. I put plug wires on it, a couple coils, mass airflow sensor, and up she went. Vroom, vroom, with 11 hours to go to Beretta Fest. I called my buddy Jim and I said, whatever you got to pack, throw it in a duffel bag. Alan and I had discussed that we were going to meet at a Steak and Shake about 2 hours outside of Branson so we can cruise into Beretta Fest together. He's sending me messages, you better be here, you better be here, you better be here. And I said, I'm on the way, on the way. And so I would send him these little things. I wish this thing had cup holders because they didn't put cup holders in it till the early 90s. So he knew I had an early one. And I wish this thing had one. So I would never really let him know what I had. I see his Beretta in Missouri at the Steak and Shake, and I pull in and park it right behind his so he couldn't see. I called him. I said, where you at? He's in there having a shake, of course. So he comes out, and I'm ready just to give it to him. And he couldn't believe that I found the Holy Grail. He thought I had this Iron Duke piece of crap. So we cruise ourselves into Beretta Fest to experience a completely different car culture. And we're not the gated manual LP58, and we're not the everything else that everybody rattles off on this channel that I have no idea what they're talking about. But they're still my friends. And when I pulled into Beretta Fest, I didn't realize how rare my car was. It was like Jesus himself had pulled into the Shoney's parking lot. And it was incredible. For those of you that have never been to Branson, Missouri, the Osmonds have a theater there, but it's not Donnie and Marie. It's like the backup Osmonds, like that nobody knows. These people were incredibly awesome, but they just could not believe that I had found this thing. And my buddy Alan was like, oh my God, dude, you are like the hero of this event. The next day was the big day, the car show and all this stuff, because they had gone to the drags that evening. I passed on the drags on mine, and they were probably running 18-second quarters or whatever. I have no idea. We get to the show, and they have left me a spot up front in my Beretta because it's apparently rare. I didn't know it had some extra headlight thing that they had never seen before that was only available for months or something. Came time for trophies, and I'm sitting there. And they all knew kind of my story that I had bought it 72 hours before Beretta Fest. And there was a trophy for Beretta Fest or bust. I've never won a trophy at any car show in owning the Ute, the General Lee, everything. My first trophy, and I still have it on my desk at home, is my Beretta Fest trophy. Needless to say, Branson's like this. The old Beretta doesn't have a parking brake, so I'm rolling back into my buddy Alan the whole weekend and having a big time. We go home, and Alan goes to Iowa, and these are people you get to see once a year doing car things. And we had a terrific time getting to know and meet new people that are in a completely different car culture. Come time to sell the old Beretta, because Travis sure didn't need a Beretta. I only lost $1,100 on it, but it made its way. There was a fella that flew up from New Orleans, picked him up at the airport, and the mighty Beretta made it all the way home. It was an $1,100 loss, but it was worth every penny. We would receive phone calls in the office from the folks working on Iron Man. I started a company 20 years ago called Celebrity Machines. And I hate for everything to revolve around the Dukes of Hazzard, but I had a General Lee, the pride of the South, driving around on an Indiana license plate. And in that year, the Indiana plates were probably something terrible or had flowers on it, or who the heck knows. Indiana has never been a champion in artwork on their license plates, and it's never been very attractive either way. Until they're just plain or something. And one year it said back home again, and all of us kids took it and made it say race home again, like needless to say, I needed a license plate for my General Lee. And the General Lee's license plate that drove around for the entire series said CNH 320 Hazzard County. It meant absolutely nothing, but was the lottery that the General Lee's plate was pulled from. And it changed a couple times. It was tan, like the Georgia tan plates. And then for some reason it went green. And then in the 2005 movie, it had a big Georgia peach on it. And it was the current plate of that year. But I needed a plate for my car. So I started researching the prop companies and the builders who would hand make these plates for not only the Dukes of Hazzard, but everything from the Fall Guy to Knight Rider to every television show you can think of. All of these cars that have vehicles in them require a plate, and most all of them are not real plates. They're either cardboard, or they're plastic, or they're vacuum formed, or they're actually metal, and they have sandblast mask on them to make them look embossed. And I located a gentleman by the name of Tom Hofarth, and he worked for Earl Hayes Press. And Earl Hayes Press makes everything from cop car decals to, there's a internet story where Al Bundy reads the same newspaper 20 years apart. They're the ones that made the newspaper. You'll see beer cans that say beer on them, or just anything. They are a prop house. And back in the day, there used to be four prop houses. One of them since gone out of business, but they all pretty much do the same thing. They will make license plates, newspapers, decals, you name it, anything that's paper related and whatever else. They're from guns and badges to, I was more concerned about license plates. So this gentleman, Tom Hofarth, was nice enough to invite me to Earl Hayes Press and learn how they make license plates. And they were the ones that made the plates for the Dukes of Hazzard. Some of the mechanics still had original plates, and you'll see original plates, prop plates go up on eBay for big dollar and big money. I just wanted one for my car. And so I had him hand make me one in front of me, make a plate. And it would express that this is a union thing, and they're our craftsmen. And the artwork and the skill was incredible. But I wanted to learn how to do it myself. And I knew other people wanted plates for their cars too, even if it was just for a car show setting. Along came a plate stamping machine from a prison auction, and I bought a plate stamping machine with all the dies from a prison auction and had no idea how to use this thing, and it was bigger than this room is, and didn't even have the ability to move it or a place to store it. So I taught myself how to make license plates with the help of a convicted felon who used to make them for the state in which I live in. He helped us keep all of our fingers on our hands, and we're making license plates. And I started a company called Celebrity Machines, because all of the plates that appear on the vehicles appear on Celebrity Machines. And I also often reference my friend John Schneider from the Dukes of Hazzard, the blonde guy. He, back in the day, owned an exotic car company called John Schneider's Celebrity Machine. And he had everything under the sun. In Cannonball Run 2, when Kathy Bach gets out of the Lamborghini, that is John Schneider's Lamborghini. So he had a taste for exotic cars, and he started a car dealership and a performance shop called John Schneider's Celebrity Machine. So we borrowed the name from him because he's always just been a huge supporter of everything that we've done. And we started stamping generally license plates, though we had no idea what we were doing, but they were right. And all of the Dukes of Hazzard fandom was super duper happy. So we were like, well, what else can we do? What other stuff? Knight Rider plate was really cool, and it was on the back of the cool Trans Am that talked, and it said Knight in California. So we started stamping Knight plates, and there were some Knight Rider people that had done it before and kind of held my hand and made sure that I had the correct font. And I knew just enough people to be dangerous and to make sure that they were correct and screen accurate, because anybody can get a plastic or a plate in Helvetica and put Knight on it, and it just looks terrible. And they are for sale, and you can buy them, and they do look bad, and then they get bad reviews, but then they think they're ours, and that's a whole other thing. So then one plate turned into two plates, and then Back to the Future. And in '85, when the DeLorean comes out of the back of Doc Brown's van, it's presented well, and Bob Gale and everybody shot it amazing, and it's just the moment for the DeLorean, and the first thing you see is Out of Time on that beautiful California Golden State license plate. And I'm like, how on God's green earth am I going to get the correct, because it has 8 digits on a 7-digit license plate. The stickers are, so overseas, when they would release the movie on opening week, you would get a pamphlet or like a magazine with the movie, not only with your ticket price, but on the back of that had a dead-on shot of the out-of-time license plate. And it had the stickers and everything. So I was able to get it exactly as it appeared, learn how to do the Golden State stuff at the top, and we were off and running with out-of-time plates. So now we have a whopping 3, Dukes of Hazzard, Knight Rider, and Back to the Future. But Back to the Future caught fire, and we were the only ones that made the correct screen-accurate plate, and it was awesome. So then Back to the Future started financing other plates that were kind of duds, but other things that, because if you have a company called Celebrity Machines, you can't just stop because you didn't like that movie or you didn't like Herbie the Love Bug or whatever else. You had to make the gauntlet of celebrity and star car license plates. And then we started getting requests. And fans, this is kind of pre-Facebook groups and whatever else, and our Facebook page, and they would be on the RPF, the replica prop forum. They said, can you do the plate from Jurassic Park? And we've never done a plate that had a logo on it. And we're like the Jeep plates, like Tyrannosaurus, like, oh boy. The people that build the Jurassic Park Jeeps are unbelievable. And those are not easy vehicles to make. None of these star cars are. But it was the icing on the cake when they could put the correct license plate on the back of their car. So we became the go-to for a lot of star car fans and people that were fans of the weirdest shows and everything from Miami Vice, and I keep saying The Fall Guy, from Starsky and Hutch to you name it, the weirdest shows. And then we started figuring out that Hollywood would hide things in license plates. The Blues Brothers license plate is BDR 529, Illinois. And that's Black Diamond Riders, and their address was 529. And that was the first club that Dan Aykroyd ever played at. And we never really realized how much hidden stuff. Herbie the Love Bug, OFP 857, our first production, August of 1957. And that was the first time the director or producer worked together, and I believe it was a Zorro movie of all things. But so we learned how to do all this stuff. We realized that there was life beyond the Dukes of Hazzard, and there was other amazing builders that were building cars that took generations and lifetimes, and all they needed was to remove their state plate off the back and put a celebrity car license plate. So that's where Celebrity Machines just took off. And we have made plates for countless movies, and we would receive phone calls in the office from the folks working on Iron Man. We need Stark 11, Stark 4, Stark whatever. And we're like, sure, no problem. And then they'll appear at the premieres and all this stuff. And we're like going, all of this happened in this little bitty backyard shop. So they invited us to bring our product to Amazon. And there was a lot of licensing and a lot of things that we had to go through that this backyard garage business was not ready for. The CEO of my life, my wife, is a whole lot smarter than I am. She just took my goofy idea and turned it into a living. And we had to learn how to adjust to not only Amazon in the United States, but overseas, because there are fans of celebrity cars everywhere. And we understand the fandom because we're fans too. It's absolutely nuts from where it was 20 years ago to where it is today. So then it gives us the ability to help make the world a better place. We have donated more license plates to the Michael J. Fox Foundation than any other place on earth. When there was a shooting in Dayton, Ohio, we did a plate that said Dayton Strong and donated lots and lots of plates to that. It's weird that just that simple piece of aluminum on the rear end of your car can help make the world a better place. But it's each one does something, and you'll be like, oh, Travis, you did this or that plate, or I saw this, or there's movies that aren't even out yet that we're making the plates for now. And animated movies, like weird stuff, like when Spies in Disguise came out on Christmas Day, we did the plate and we're like, how do we do an animated plate? Audi didn't care, just make it. Okay, it's made. There are some things coming down the pipe, and like I said, if you'd have told me 20 years ago that I would be making license plates for a living and not have a Department of Corrections number wearing oranges or stripes for a living, I'd have told you were crazy. We're just going to go and jump the car. Ta-da! My dream growing up was always to see the General Lee fly. Now, I knew Bo, Luke, and Daisy were not the people jumping the cars. I had enough knowledge to know they were stuntmen, and this all goes back to the Hollywood star cars of the 70s and 80s that were drastically more impressive than Transformers. But the General Lee became an obsession for me to not only build one and become friends with not just Bo, Luke, and Daisy, Kathy, John, and Tom, but the stuntmen, Al Wyatt Jr., Henry Kenji, Corey Eubanks, just all these amazing stuntmen that went on from Knight Rider to Dukes of Hazzard to Fall Guy to all these shows that had television star cars. The General Lee received more fan mail than any of the actors on the show, to the point of where Warner Brothers started sending out little cards, and instead of them saying like, to Billy, loved the General Lee, they had a tire mark on it. And that was the General Lee's autograph. They're valuable, but you can still find the little General Lee postcards that Warner Brothers would ship out. After putting on what became Dukes Fest now, back in 2001 and 2, I did a thing called the North American General Lee Fan Club Convention. And for some reason, my little house in Indianapolis was the mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard, which makes absolutely no sense. But I would chase down the stuntmen and talk to them and the special effects guys. And in the later seasons of the Dukes of Hazzard, they were jumping miniatures. It wasn't the best thing you've ever seen, but someone had to make that. And Jack Sessoms was a huge miniature guy, and I chased him down. Knocked on his door in Redlands, California. He's like, "You're here for what?" And I'm like, "The Dukes of Hazzard." My goal was to make the General Lee fly. And like I said, we did a convention in 2001, 2002, and I didn't fly out Bo, Luke, and Daisy, and we did it at Ben Jones's place at Cooters in Sevierville, Virginia. But the original mechanics were Tom Sermento, Rich Septon, and A.J. Thrasher, and they built all these General Lees. And they had all these amazing stories on everything that ever took place to build cars and making them fly, because Dodge never built an airplane. And any car like the General Lee, the 69 Dodge Charger and 68 and 70 for that matter, are all unibody cars. So whenever they're 2 or 3 feet off the ground, they're gone. That's over with. So they destroyed 321 Dodge Chargers to play one General Lee for 7 seasons of the Dukes of Hazzard. But you can double that number in police cars, because on any given time, Roscoe would run into Enos, would run into Cletus, and we'd be down 3 police cars, and they'd go get me 3 more. I wanted to see the car fly. It was never really my idea. I just was like, all right, whatever. So Rich Septon, one of the mechanics on the Dukes of Hazzard, I flew him out to one of the conventions, and he flew home with Corey Eubanks sitting next to him on the flight. And he called me, he's like, "Travis, you screwed up." And Rich always liked to pull my leg. I was like, "Man, did you have a terrible flight?" I had no idea why he was so upset with me. And he said, you sat me next to Corey on the plane. And I'm like, "Oh, man, this guy got body odor? I mean, what's the matter with Corey? Corey's cool. His dad's Bob Eubanks from the Newlywed Game." He said, "We want to jump a car." We started talking about it all the way home. He said, "If you get a car, we'll jump it." And I'm like going, where do you begin? This is a semi-difficult vehicle to find, a 1969 Dodge Charger. Who's going to let us jump a car? There's 2 brothers in Washington State that donated a 68 Dodge Charger. They painted it and everything. Anytime you see a car on 2 wheels, that's called skiing a car, it's one of the Smith brothers. They've gone on they were obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard also as children, and now they've turned into stuntmen themselves, or at least Jamie has. Donated this car, brought it all, running and driving, had more Bondo than your local body shop in it, but we were going to destroy it anyhow. Cut the 68 taillights, put 69s on it. I decaled it up. It looked like the General Lee. It's the General Lee. We are going to destroy this car. So we shipped it down to another mechanic in North Carolina. He put the roll cages in it. For good measure, anytime there was a bad guy in Hazzard County, he was always driving a 4-door Malibu for some reason. I have no idea why all the bad guys like 4-door Malibus. So we bought a 4-door Malibu, roll caged it, bought 2 police cars, roll caged those. So we had a Hazzard County cop car, Chickasaw cop car, of course a 4-door Malibu, and the General Lee. We just needed the place to do all this stuff at. So I approached the city of Covington, Georgia, where the first 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard were filmed. And I'm like, it's going to bring all this money to Covington. And all I want to do, I just need a place to jump the car, because that's where the original jump happened. Saturday, November 11th, 1978 at Oxford College in front of Seney Hall. They jumped a General Lee on Veterans Day because they knew the Dean of Students was going to be away that day, and they knew that they can get it. They said they told the college they were just going to do some hard driving around campus, and all these college students woke up to a 69 Charger jumping in front of the dean's office, basically. So I said to the Chamber of Commerce, I said, please let me jump a car down here in Covington, Georgia. And they're famous for In the Heat of the Night, a bunch of other things. In the Cannonball Run, they landed the airplane on the same square that is Hazzard Square. It's the same place. I was passed off to a couple people like, this crazy Yankee is down here to jump a car. Who can take care of him? So there was one really super great guy for the Parks Department, and they had a place called Soldier Field in Covington, Georgia. This is basically softball diamonds is what it is. So they said, if you get all the permission and permits and everything you need and rent the field, you can jump the car. And I mean, that's a green light. It's like someone has given us a green light to put a 69 Dodge Charger in the air. And I, expressed that we're going to bring all the right stuntmen and all this stuff and this, that, and other. And I went home like, how on God's green earth are we going to do this stuff? The big thing he said is you need insurance. Where do you go to get insurance to jump a 69 Dodge Charger? So, of course, everyone said no. But the Lloyds of London said yes. And for that day, to jump the General Lee, and I'm flying we flew in 7 stuntmen, all the original mechanics that built the car, built the ramp, had the Soldier Field and everything. For 24 hours, I had $4.5 million in insurance to jump one car. When I was doing all of the press junkets for this thing, or press releases, I was doing all these press releases. I was faxing press releases from my apartment that this was going to happen. And we're talking about caller IDs that weren't involved in the phone, and like it was like a box. And so I got a call in my office that day prior to all this happening, and it said Warner Brothers on it. And I'm like, oh my God, I've got all this money and all this stuff and insurance, and I'm approved and everything, and we're going to get shut down because we are jumping their car. Note to self, you can't copyright a name unless it is your name. You can't copyright a flag. You can't copyright a number. And Dodge owns the rights to the Charger. So the Charger, the 01, the flag, and the General Lee is all somebody else's stuff. So I'm sitting there going, okay, Warner Brothers can't say anything about this. So I answer the phone. Gentleman says, Travis Bell. And I said, yes. He said, Greg Silverman's office. And I said, yes. He said, hold for Mr. Silverman. And I go, oh, man. I'm like, all right. He said, Mr. Bell, my name's Greg Silverman. He said, your event coming up. And I said, yeah, in like 3 weeks. Like, there's no way we can shut this down. What do you expect? And I said, I don't know. I expect 200 to 5,000 people. I don't know how many people are going to show up. I'm faxing press releases from my apartment. And this is pre-Facebook stuff. Like, this is a website and message boards. He said, well, I'm kicking around an idea for a Dukes of Hazzard movie, but I may come down there or send some people down there, but you won't know I'm there. And I said, all right. So I woke up that morning and had been down there for a week and getting all the plan and putting all these Jersey barriers up and all this stuff. So if the car decided to careen off, I didn't kill everybody in the field that day. And it was raining sideways that morning. And I'm talking hard Georgia rain. I have $4.5 million and this car has to fly today. We got out to Soldier Field and it was soggy. And there was a line of people like ready to get in. I had to hire some local police officers, super great people in Covington. And, but of course they're the Hollywood South. They're used to everything coming down there. And he could tell the police officer, I was like pacing and he's like, give it a second. It'll probably stop raining about 12. And what time you jump in this car? I said 2. He said, you're good. 12 rolls around, sunny, beautiful out, dries up. With one of the police cars, one of the greatest veteran stuntman, his name is Al White Jr., and he's a blonde guy. He would double Bo Duke, John Schneider. He said, Travis, I'm going to barrel roll this police car before you jump. And they built a pipe ramp and full roll cage, and he's in there. And so, they had this little bad guy chase and whatever else. And of course, Roscoe's car goes this way, and the Chickasaw car, green and white car, he barrel rolls it, lands on all 4 wheels. And of course, all the stuntmen run over and give him a thumbs up, and he's fine. They pull him out and they drop him on the ground, because they're the fraternity of lunatics in themselves. He walked over and he said, Travis, that's the last stunt I'm ever going to do. I really don't know if he was in good health or not, but he wanted to do it one more time. And so the final stunt if his long storied career, he barreled a car for a disc jockey from Indianapolis in Covington, Georgia, with a bunch of his friends in front of 5,000 of his closest friends that he just met. That car barrel rolls. And it's starting to dry up, and now it's time to jump the General Lee. Everything that I've waited since January 26, 1979 is about to happen. I borrowed a microphone and a speaker so I could talk to these people so some idiot didn't run out in front of the car. And they had backed the General Lee up all the way down this side street. And they didn't have keys to the gate that they brought the car in, so they cut it with bolt cutters to open the gate. And they put the ramp about 80 feet away from the gate. And we parked the bad guy car down there and then the other Roscoe police car, because if the General Lee landed and went out of control, they were going to ram it with one of the cars. We were jumping over the same police car that the first General Lee jumped over. We put the police car into position, which was Roscoe's very first police car ever here. So this is a Dukes of Hazzard relic that I'm about to jump over in a car that's full of Bondo in a softball diamond with 5,000 people on both sides, and it's wet and it's not good. So they back the car all the way up. They let it rip. Car comes down the street. It comes into the field and it recoils pretty hard because it came in off the street pretty hard. But it recoiled as it hit the ramp and the rear end comes over. And Corey, he's coming in hot and it went airborne. 181 feet later, it lands on its nose because we didn't put any weight in the trunk because we were just going to go and jump the car. Ta-da! We jumped over Roscoe's original police car. It's priceless. It's a Dukes of Hazzard relic to everybody here. And Corey lands nose first. And then it goes end over end. And then now it's facing in the air the wrong way. And both of these cars are coming at it to ram it because we don't know where there's a fence coming up and we're on wet grass with the car sliding out of control. It landed on all four wheels, slid backwards, stopped, and he got out. And there's a video of me like running after it with my hands in the air because I'm like going, oh, what did I just see? And from my position, it's going toward the crowd. He gets out and he goes, I cleared the cop car. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you did. All of these Dukes festivals and all of these people that now jump cars and all these other people that risk their lives and do some pretty cool stuff. It all started, that car had not been in the air since 1984. And that day in 2003, we made history with the 25th anniversary flight of the General Lee. Needless to say, the car was in pieces and they punctured the gas tank, and of course the firemen are over there putting out or spraying it down, and I'm like going, this thing is a disaster. Like, it was as big as a Chevette by the time we were done. It was bad, bad, bad. But of course, we didn't expect it to survive. We just didn't expect it to be that bad. There was probably about 100 General Lees down there to see this in a big festival, and they went all on to Covington Square. I took the car to the police station, what was left of the car, on the back of a flatbed because people were picking parts off of it because it's the 25th anniversary. It's Dukes of Hazzard history. And I got back, and it was just me and this soldier field, and it was quiet, and that was it. And my daughter was very young at the time, and my mom and dad gave her a choice. And they said, do you want to go to Disneyland with Grandma and Grandpa, or do you want to go watch Dad jump the General Lee? And my daughter had lived with the General Lee her whole life, like it was just a member of the family. So, of course, she didn't choose the General Lee. She chose to go to Disney World. So I called my mom, and I'm sitting there going, we did it. We did it. She's like, what? And I go, we jumped the car. And she goes, oh, yeah. And I'm like, yeah. She goes, and then I just started crying like a baby, and I could not stop. I mean, all these years we put it here, and it was raining, and oh my God, and then the cops stopped the road, and then it was over. And everything, and it was just quiet, and all this work. We went back, and that car was sold. We sold it to a collector. But everything beyond that now, it's already been done. I appreciate that they're still jumping cars, and there's still interest in the Dukes of Hazzard. And now they're jumping Trans Ams for Smokey and the Bandit, friends and stuff like that. But we were the first ones that did it. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to walk up on the Holy Grail of all Fast and Furious parts. Lately, there's been a lot of Fast and Furious videos and talk, and for some reason, I'm one of those people that holds up a sign that says, it is time to stop making Fast and the Furious movies. I appreciated it when it came out, and the first couple of them. Growing up in the 70s and the 80s, where cars were stars of cars and everything had their own thing, and everybody had a cool car and a cool motorcycle, and even Top Gun had cool planes. And then you graduate to this weird kind of fantasy world of street racing, and I'm like, this doesn't exist. I was, of course, chasing some star cars around in California to purchase, and I ended up at Cinema Vehicle Services. And of course, their name says it all. They do everything. If you need a cop car to blow up, if you need everything, they do it. I became friends with one of the other cinema vehicle providers, and he goes by Movie Mike. And Movie Mike owned another picture car rental, and there was Bob Hartwick and all these other people, but they all do the same thing. They're all the rentals for every kind of vehicle, from a taxi cab to you name it, they'll provide it for you. Period dated. And of course, if we're a company that puts license plates on the back of these things, we all want to be together. For some reason, Ray Clear gave me the keys to a golf cart one day on his property where all of these cars, for as far as the eye could see, from prison buses to military stuff to taxi cabs and police cars were. It was at the same time that the Starsky and Hutch movie came out. So for some reason, I was on the hunt for the Torinos for the Starsky and Hutch movie. And they had been jumped and they were a mess. And they had this off-road suspension on them because they were to be reused. We come into this bullpen where they have doubles. So if you have a Yugo that was on fire, you have the other Yugo that has not yet been on fire. And you can, say the before and after or whatever else. Along comes all of the cars from the very first Fast and the Furious movie. Like, this is the angels sing in the sky parts. And, here is the 70 Dodge Charger that flips and rolls, and then the Super goes underneath it. The Eclipse that was shot up and then blew up, and all of the bullet holes, and all of the process vehicles that are cut in half where they're filming all the things, and the Charger that's cut and everything. And I'm like going, man, I not a huge fan of this, but I have just walked into the holy grail of Fast and Furious cars. Someone wants these things. As we start walking around, we realize how they built them and how things were. And the shoot-up car was actually a sunroof car, and it blows out and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, man, this stuff is so cool. Of all things, I'm sitting there looking at Fast and Furious cars, and I'm definitely not there to do that. But then we round another corner. So this isn't like a bullpen, a little area, a fenced-in area. And they had the Starsky and Hutch cars. They had the cars from everything. But we round the corner, and there's all the body kits for all of the other cars. So the Supra with the graphic on the side, and all the Hondas and the pink cars, and well, the pink cars were another, but they were there too because they were on to film the other shows. And body kits for as far as the eye could see, removed from Fast and Furious cars. And then these vehicles were recycled into other shows and things. And at that point, I am like going, we have hit the mother load. My care factor was really small, but it was, someone wanted the stuff. Ray didn't care too much about it. They've made their money, and Universal owned lots of the rights to it, and it was fine. But we have a lot of this taking up space on their property in which they can put more vehicles on. So I made a deal to purchase Dom's Charger that flips at the final scene of the very first movie. I was going to buy the shoot 'em up Fast and Furious green Eclipse. I didn't really care about the process vehicles, but if the money was right, we would have taken them. And I was going to buy all the body kits. I live, just right around the corner, 3,000 miles away. So I was going to get a U-Haul truck or whatever and just take all this stuff with me. And I was there with a couple other friends. If you ever find yourself doing things by yourself, it's probably the best thing to be doing, just because someone is going to screw up your deal. And that's what happened to me. They were filming a new Herbie the Love Bug movie, of all things. And they were scouting or looking for beetles, which I didn't find to be a hard thing to find. But this particular fully loaded or whatever beetle movie, and actually if you watch that movie in the junkyard, and I have never seen the movie, but I've seen the clip, in the junkyard, the same 70 Fast and Furious flipped Charger is in the junkyard where she finds the beetle or something. It all went hand in hand, and I took a friend with me. And there's another Herbie the Love Bug movie there's an evil Herbie, and his name is Horace. And I had no idea that there was like the Darth Vader of Herbies, but he wanted this Horace Beetle, and Cinema Vehicle Services had it, and they were going to make a deal where he traded his Herbie and got this, and it completely destroyed my Fast and the Furious deal and all this stuff. So since he undercut me to get the Horace Herbie, the Love Bug, then all of the Fast and Furious cars and parts were no longer for sale, and they actually went on to auction, and everything could have been bought for $5,000. They were ready to give the stuff away. So by me offering them $5,000 in cash, this is fuel for the week in their semi-truck. When you're in the business, things don't have as much value as they do as a fan. And a simple negotiation for $5,000 was me offering them much more than they could give a dang about. They didn't care. And all I had to do is rent a U-Haul truck, and by the time I was back, that deal was destroyed. They physically don't own most of the vehicles. They are writing the check. And so if Celebrity Machines and VINwiki owns a studio car business, then they would call us and say, I need a bus and I need 4 police cars and whatever else, and we would provide them to them. But on another show, you may see our same bus and our other 4 police cars if we didn't blow them up on first show and put them on another thing. So when I came across all the Fast and Furious cars, all these things we're doing at that point was taking up space. And they didn't care. And not only had the studio made enough money and ridiculous money off the show, but the picture vehicle service has also made their money too. So right now they're just taking up space. And for me to offer them money for these things, they're like, I hope more guys like this show up, because, as a collector or a fan of the show, or even a fan of whatever they end up in, they're like, this is the Holy Grail car. But to the production company, they could give a damn. You openly are not going to knock on the door and say, hey, I'd like to purchase. You have to have an in. The Supernatural television series that's been on forever, there are a lot of replicas of that Impala, but real ones are very few and far to find because they are built by a specific person and they do not let them go. The more custom the vehicle is, the less likely it is to get into private use or private hands. So back when the final 17 General Lees from the Dukes of Hazzard were released, those cars had sat with their windows down outside since 1984, and they were picked up in the early 90s and 91. So they had no desire to let them go, just because if you decide to rob a bank in the car, you're in the most famous car in the world, but then of course the studio looks bad and everybody looks bad. There are a lot of people that believe, if Paul Walker can jump his car, why can't I jump my Paul Walker car? So there are so many risks, and that's why a lot of them are crushed or destroyed. The Super Pursuit Mode car from Knight Rider that had all the wings and things that came out, that car had a wrecking ball dropped on the top of it to make sure that when they would, over the course of the 7 seasons of the Dukes of Hazzard, they destroyed 321 Chargers to play 1 General Lee. But all of them, they're like, there's got to be a General Lee junkyard out there somewhere. So what they would do is the minute they would get them to the junkyard, they would cut the roof off and take the flag off the car, and then they would take both the doors off. Therefore, they would not be able to be identified as a General Lee anymore. But then, Bob, who's a huge fan of the show, can also put it back together as he found it in the General Lee junkyard and then go jump the creek with him and kill himself. So there are tons of liabilities. It's never who you are, it's who you know. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to walk up on the Holy Grail of all Fast and Furious parts, and I had no desire to find it. And all of these vehicles still have titles. Even if you didn't receive a title with it, you could have done mechanics lane paperwork on it or whatever. I have a friend named Martin who found all of the original Christines from the movie Christine, and of course they were in various conditions. One had been ran over by a bulldozer, and one of it had set on fire, and this, that, and other. But there's an amazing story of how he put some of, or at least one of them back together, and it's now in the Peterson. Star cars obviously have a mind of their own, and they literally, some of them show up on TV and driving themselves around. But when they are done, they are just, get this thing out of here, and they will either end up in a museum, they will end up somehow in private hands, which is not easy to do, or they will end up in a wrecking yard, and it's usually the wrecking yard. The Flip Charger brought about $45,000 or $50,000 at auction recently. The blow-up, shoot-'em-up Eclipse is now in a Star Car museum in Vegas, and this is why I hate Herbie the Love Bug. For some reason, Pontiac was in love with 50 Cent. My daily driver in Indianapolis is a modern El Camino, and every stoplight I go to, they're like, is that the new El Camino? No, it's never gonna happen. Every Photoshop job that you see with a Chevy Cruze on the front and a pickup truck rear end on it, it is not gonna happen. General Motors is not going to rebirth the El Camino because of the pickup truck market. There is no market in the United States for an El Camino anymore. But Pontiac attempted to do it in 2010. In 2009, at the New York Auto Show, for some reason, Pontiac was in love with 50 Cent. And 50 Cent rolled out there with a Pontiac G8 and a Pontiac G8 ST, which is street truck. And they were going to introduce the 2010 Pontiac G8 ST. And they were going to reintroduce an El Camino in 2010. And Pontiac died in 2009. So we never got them, even though there was a few that floated around and show cars, and Lord knows where they are now. So I was in love with this vehicle, and I thought they were very interesting, but I knew they were Holden Utes from Australia, because the G8 is a Holden Commodore. And then it became the Chevy SS, which is still a Holden Commodore. So a 2008, 2009 Pontiac G8 is a VE Holden Commodore. That's it. They rebadge them, put a different bumper grill on them, ship them to the US. We got left-hand drive, 6-liter, 4 doors, we're gone. But we never got the pickup truck version, which was a Ute, and we never got the wagon version, which was an estate or a statesman, and there's a bunch of different names for them. So we only got the 4-door version. So how on God's green earth am I gonna get a left-hand drive, never made it, Holden Ute into the United States without everybody going on the internet and every Facebook board and it's gotta be 25 years old. He's gonna have ice at his house. He's gonna take his car. They're not coming. What I did is I bought a 2009 Pontiac G8 GT with a horrible Carfax. I bought it cheap, but I bought it right. I think I gave $13,200 for it, and this is 4 or 5 years ago. And this is not a very old car, 2009 G8 GT. We had multiple bumper covers and multiple owners. Then I have an Australian friend in North Carolina. His name is David Lowe, and David Lowe is from Australia, and he is driving a Holden Ute in North Carolina. And I'm like, now how in the world did Dave Lowe get a Ute and its left-hand drive in the US? And there is an old Jalopnik story with a Ute, and it says, how did someone get this in the United States? It's not his car, but someone else has done it. And there was a place out of Colorado that I didn't deal with that everybody always asks if my car is from. My car is not from them. And they're famous for bringing in Utes and whatever else. I called David and I said, Dave, how on God's green earth did you? And he said, I brought a body into the United States. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? He said, a Ute body. And I had a G8. And they're both made by the same robots. And there are many different ways in which you can convert this 4-door Pontiac into a 2-door Holden. And I'm like, man, lay it on me. Tell me what the logistics are. And my wife has a 2008 Ignition Orange G8 GT that she loves. I just bought this horrible Carfax G8 GT 1 year newer, 09, and I don't really care about it. What can we do? He found me a 2009 Ute body in Australia that was in a flood. And so apparently this husband and wife in Australia got a little bit of a right-left. She took off in the Ute, put it in the creek, killed the bonnet, the bumper bar, everything, and flooded it, and it was a total. and they call them statutory write-offs in Australia. So it was a stat write-off, and he said, I can get you the body, what's left of it, because I don't need a motor and transmission. I got one in the G8. I don't need the doors. I got 2 of them on the G8. I'm not going to use the rear ones. He said, I can get it over here in the U.S., and I can get it shipped, and we can bring it into the country. And I wanted a hard lid, which is they call it the tray in Australia, which goes over the bed. And I said, man, I'm ready to write the check. Let's go. For cheap, we got a body into the United States on a container. And he brought a couple more over for himself to build utes out of. I went all the way down to North Carolina with an empty truck and trailer. I met his amazing father-in-law at a body shop. When he called me and said my car was in, I didn't know what I was going to get. I'm just spent quite a bit of money, but not much, on this ute body. And there wasn't really much left of it. It was no doors, no hood. They had to break the windshield because it didn't pass DOT in the United States. Like, I was like, oh boy. But man, I've built a lot of stuff. I can do this, you know? And my friend Charles Phelps had a GXP G8 that he got rear-ended in, and he did the same thing. And I'm like, if Charles can do it and Dave can do it, Travis has got this covered, right? And I got the garage, and I get down there, and he's got one built and another one in the shop. And I'm like, whoa, like, this is way beyond my pay grade. Like, you're relocating the parking brake cable and all this stuff. And there are 2 ways to basically do this and keep it legal in the United States. And everybody flips out because it's not 25 years old and blah, blah, blah. It's not against the law to rebuild your car. I just rebuilt mine as a truck. You can cut the firewall out because the air conditioning's on one side and the steering wheel's on the other. So there are 2 different holes, and then they need to go this way. Or you can cut the cars in half and put them back together. And you're basically just drilling out all the factory welds and then re-welding everything back together again with the United States parts versus the Australian parts. And so David was like, here's your car. Have fun in Indiana. His father-in-law and I ate at this amazing barbecue place. And I walked outside and I called my wife and I said, if I take this home, it will never get done. And I want to drive this car in my lifetime, let alone this year. She's like, what are you going to do? I walked back in and I said, David, what do I need to do to have you do all the work? Because you have built, this is your 3rd one. You know what you're doing. And him and his father-in-law talked it over, and they shot me a price, which was half the price of the dudes in Colorado. And I went home with an empty trailer. And I came back and brought them my black Pontiac G8 GT. Clean title, crappy Carfax. And then they took my car and married it with the ute body, and then called me in 2 months and said, come pick your car up. And I'm like this is done. Like, it's over. And it's reasonable. And the work, the craftsmanship is incredible, and it's legal. I go to North Carolina and pick up my ute, and I got less than $40,000 in this thing in the United States. And I'm like going, all right, super cool. Now how do we title it? And everybody's like going, we're on the way. ICE is going to be knocking on Travis's door any second. They know where I live. They're not coming. We get to Indianapolis, and Indiana is famous for Winnebagos and the RV Hall of Fame. If you type in Elkhart, Indiana, hand to God, up northern Indiana is the Winnebago or RV Hall of Fame. I have no idea who goes there. But if Ed Bolian and I have a Chevy Savannah van and we go put a camper rear end on it, it's still a Chevy Savannah van, but no longer. It is an RV, recreational vehicle. So Indiana has this super cool thing called a body transfer affidavit, because I was concerned to run it as a Pontiac because the Pontiac still has 4 doors. Now I have 2. And if I get pulled over, they're going to be looking for a 4S, 4-door sedan, and I'm a TK truck now. So I used a state of Indiana body transfer affidavit to retitle my car as a 2009 Holden Ute, because it is a 2009 Holden Ute. It is no longer a Pontiac G8 or a 4-door. When you send that in or go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, you surrender your Pontiac title, and then they basically look at you and say, what is this? I could have called it a 2009 Ed if I wanted to, or a 2015 or a 2009 VINwiki. I could have called it a Ronald McDonald. I could have called it anything I wanted to, but it is a Holden Ute. So my truck is titled as a 2009 Holden Ute, left-hand drive, legal in all 50 in the United States. And it was not as difficult as like, oh my gosh, because all the guys that bring Skylines in and all these things are really bending it until it breaks. But there is a legal way to do it. And if you want to convert a Holden from a VE 2008, 2009, or even a 14 to 17 VF, they're legal. And everything about it is just, all the airbags are still intact. Everything still works. There's no service engine lights. I got pulled over in North Carolina, and the good old boy cop had no idea what he was looking at, but he still wrote me a ticket to my 2009 Holden Ute. And the ticket clinic took care of that. I daily drive this thing. I drive it every day. If I got to get mulch in it, so every stoplight, hey, is that the new El Camino? No, it's not the new El Camino, but I could understand why you would think that. But when you tell them it's a 2009, they're almost depressed. They're like, get out of here. And I'm like, we just never got them in the United States because we killed Pontiac in 2010, and 50 Cent never got his either. There is no way that a police department would sell you a full code police car. You can buy anything you would like to on eBay. And for some reason, I went searching for a Crown Victoria. Now, Doug tells stories about Crown Victorias. Arnie seems to love Crown Victorias, and Crown Victorias are usually nothing but trouble. But for some reason, we all love them too. So I went shopping for an Indiana sheriff car. And truckers call them Indiana waffle monsters because they are brown and tan, so they look like waffles and syrup. I minded my own business. Now, circa this is about 14 years ago, and came across a 98 Ford Crown Victoria sheriff car. And it still said sheriff, real big on the side of it, brown and tan. It was just an online auction bid, and it's county sheriff car, stars, everything, decals, full code police car. What had happened, it was Miami County, Indiana, northern Indiana, and they were going to run it in the demolition derby because it had a 4.6 in it, and it had a bit of a knock, and they were just going to beat it to death. But for some reason, they did not run it in the county fair, and the officer that still had it put it up for auction on eBay. And you can still, yes, buy everything you would like, find it on eBay. So I bid, and I was the high bidder on a full code Indiana Waffle Monster sheriff car. About 14 years ago, of course, my daughter at that time, 10, 11 years old, and she loved cameras. And her first tattoo was a 35 millimeter on her foot. I was always more of a best friend than a dad, which sometimes is not the best thing to be. But I took her with me everywhere. I said, Kate, I bought this sheriff car up in northern Indiana. We had truck and trailer. Let's go. And of course, she had digital camera that day, and she went and did her own thing and kind of just took pictures out the window and everything. We get up there to this kind of like an impound lot, like a bullpen, and this gentleman's waving me in, come on in. And I back into this lot, and there it is, brown and tan. Decals are still on it. Still says county sheriff on the back of it. And I'm thinking, man, this cat would have taken the decals off of it before I picked it up. I handed him the loot, time to go. He drives it right up on top of the trailer. I strap it down. Life is good. And he waves me, see you later, goodbye. I get to US 31. He goes north. I go south. I bought a full code Indiana sheriff car on eBay. So I go home and take it off the trailer, and it's knocking to beat. I mean, it's not good. At that point, I'm thinking, man, let's drop a motor in this thing. I bought it. Let's do it. So I bought another Crown Vic, took a motor out, dropped a motor in it, and I'm driving. I've got a full code Indiana sheriff car, and I am out on the town in this thing. There was a lot of things that I didn't know you can get away with in a sheriff car. I didn't realize you get free McDonald's in a sheriff car. I didn't realize you get free car washes in a sheriff car. There's a lot of cool things you get away with in a sheriff car. I had one of those dare to keep your kids off drugs license plate on the back. And I was so bold where the personalized license plate says donut on it. And so I'm whipping around in an Indiana sheriff car, full code, everything down the side. Still says sheriff, tinted windows, and a donut license plate. And other sheriffs are like waving at me like, howdy. And I was a club disc jockey back then. I'd drive to the club. I'd drive it everywhere. John Schneider from Dukes of Hazzard, he needed a trip to Metropolis, Illinois, because he was Jonathan Kent on Smallville, Superman's father, drove the sheriff car. When we unveiled the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard down in Georgia, drove the sheriff car down there. When we did the Blues Brothers trip in 2005, one of my friends drove the sheriff car and directed traffic with it in downtown Chicago. I drove that car so often, and in Indiana, police officers can't have goatees. They can't have facial hair. And I'm just whipping around, standard goatee, waving at officers, this, that, and other. At the time, I had a friend that lived up in Crawfordsville, Indiana, and that's 20 miles or so outside of Indianapolis. And I drove him home, and it was cold, snowing, and a mess out. And after I dropped him off, I got on the highway and heading back home. And right on the exit ramp, the old black ice, the old full code Crown Vic, did a couple donuts down the middle of the highway, went behind a guardrail, and then it couldn't get back up on the highway because I was in between Valley and the old Crown Vic sitting there with the headlights pointing out, snow everywhere, buried deep. So Officer Travis here gets out of his car, shuts the door, and I make my way up the kind of the embankment behind the snow, step over the guardrail, and here comes an Indiana state trooper. I'm like, oh man, this couldn't be any worse than it already is. And it's about 2:15 a.m. And he says, "You're a little out of your jurisdiction, aren't you?" And I'm like, buddy, if you only knew I was a little out of I was like, yeah, hit a little black ice coming off the exit ramp there, and here's where we're at. And I said, I'm thinking I'm going to go up here to this truck stop, because there's a truck stop at the exit ramp, and see if I can't just get somebody to pull this thing out. Get on in. So Officer Travis gets in with the state trooper. He takes me back to the truck stop, and he says, all right, partner, hey, when you get in there, ask for Tom. He runs the tow truck, and he'll pull you out. Is Tom here? There's Tom. Hey, Crown Vic, the sheriff car. He said, oh yeah, I heard it come over the radio. Get on in. Took me back to the Crown Vic. It was a bit of a challenge to get it all the way back up the ravine and out. He got it out, fired up the old Crown Vic, and I said, partner, where were we at? He said, sir, you have a good day. And cut me loose. We got away with everything in the sheriff car. So it kind of sat for a little while, and we had a big time with it. One day I needed to drive it somewhere. We were working on the exhaust for the Cannonball Run Ambulance or something. I got in the sheriff car because we had driven it everywhere. And little did I know that I had let the plate go expired. And so I'm whipping down through Johnson County, Indiana to the exhaust shop, minding my own business in my sheriff car, and I got pulled over by a real sheriff. And by the time I was out of it and had my hands on the side of it, I had every officer that was on duty that day in Johnson County, including Whiteland and New Whiteland, Indiana, and half of Greenwood, and had me on the side of the car. And they said, of course, I'm impersonating a police officer. I explained to the arresting officer that I had purchased the vehicle this way. And he said, there is no way that a police department would sell you a full code police car. I had the auction printed off and put it in the glove box. And I said, sir, I bought this car this way. This is my car. Of course, it gets towed in and it's gone because it has expired license plates. They did not take me to jail, but they gave me some time that day to prove that I purchased it that way. So I basically went to the police department with the auction that I took out of the glove box. And lo and behold, the arresting officer is already there, beat me there. I had to wait for someone to pick me up. And I said, here's the auction. I bought it this way. He said, Mr. Bell, I've called Miami County, Indiana, and they did not sell you that car that way. Not only that, we called the Ford dealership that they took it to where the motor was determined to be bad. And the Ford dealership also said there was no decals on that car when it came here. So unless you have something else, you'll be hearing from the prosecutor, and we're filing charges for impersonating a police officer. They swore up and down that I re-decaled the car and put a motor in it, and I was cruising around impersonating a police officer. So I went back to the house, and I was in some crap. But if you remember, I took my daughter with me that day, and she had a digital camera, and she took a picture of the police officer driving it up on my trailer. So I went home, and I printed out all of the photos of the officer that swore up and down he didn't sell it to me that way, and the Ford dealership that swore up and down it had no decals on it, and I was able to prove that I bought it that way. So I went back to New Whiteland, and on the way there, I went ahead and paid for the license plates at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles on the way so I can pick up my car. And I just calmly laid down every photo of this police officer, and it didn't matter what he said. He sold it to me that way. And at that point in time, the officer had nothing he can either A, hold my car on, or B, hold Mr. Bell for. So I got the release and went and got my car out of the impound. And the guys at the impound were just dumbfounded that they would give me my car back. And at the time, the prosecutor in Johnson County, Indiana, wrote me a letter and said, put this in your glove box because you bought it this way. So if you ever get pulled over in it again, hand them this because I don't want to go through this all over again. So they gave me my car back, proving that the Miami County deputy and officer lied, proving that the Ford dealership up in northern Indiana lied, and I never, ever, ever drove the car again, drove it straight home. Of course, I've talked about Herbie the Love Bug and Cinema Vehicle Services and movie places. The picture car rental people are always looking for police cars. And I had a perfectly good, already decaled up, running and driving Indiana sheriff car. So I called one of my friends that are still in the business, and he purchased the car from me because I had got away with murder. And then there was like a weird Quentin Tarantino movie called Grindhouse, and it had Planet Terror and like death proof on it. So if you watch Planet Terror, there is an Indiana sheriff car in Planet Terror that gets blown up. And that was the fate of that police car. Here's where I say something clever, and now you roll the music. I don't know how I orbit around Hazzard County, but somehow Travis Bell, for years, was the mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard. During this obsession of the television show and cars flying and things going on, I realized that the first 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard were filmed in Georgia, and you can still visit the sites. It pretty much is all still there, but in the late 90s and early 2000s, it really still looked the same. Because granted, the show had filmed down here in 78. So we would come down from Indianapolis and just bang around and drive General Lee's around and go play the Dukes of Hazzard. And of course, down here, and they're like, hey, it's Bo and Luke. And we're like, hey, nothing to see here. But then we wanted to find the people that worked on the show. And we would actually make these little beautiful flyers with a wanted poster. It says, if you were here this day when the car flew, call this number or whatever else. And we put them in little diners, and where the cars flew, there's obviously telephone poles and stuff. We'd take this 20-foot ladder and put this sign up. It says, if you were here on this day, blah, 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 when the car flew. And people would call. They said, yes, they held the school bus up that day just to jump the car down the street. And Mom and Dad were so mad because I was late from school. And they had all these great stories. And then we started finding the people that painted the cars in and around Conyers, Georgia, and Covington and Snailville, Georgia, and all these other places. And then we found the transportation directors, and they were like going, oh, now we got these gold mine people. And we had this fellow's name. His name was Don Schischler. And Don Schischler has won Academy Awards, and he was a director and a second unit DP. And he had no reason to be nice to me. I was just some idiot that was obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard. And I pull into this lot where all these camera cars are, and there's these little bitty short buses, yellow school buses. and a bunch of blue Ford Tauruses. And some had the front end knocked off of them. One had all 4 wheels off of them. And I was like, what on God's green earth? And he's come out and introduced him. I said, all these? He said, movie Road Trip, Sean, William Scott, they, whatever. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, these are all the Tauruses from Road Trip. There's the short buses. We got to go crush all these things and get paid for these things. I'm like, this guy's awesome. And I go, tell me about the Dukes of Hazzard. Tell me about all this stuff. And he said, well, December 23rd, 1978, I had 51 totaled vehicles after 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard. And I go, what did you do with them all? You know, he said, there's a transmission recycling shop in Dawsonville, Georgia, and his name is Shaw Recycling. And I called Cliff Shaw 2 days before Christmas, 1978, and he came and picked them all up. I said, all of them? He said, all of them. I'm like, well, when was the last time you talked to Cliff Shaw? He said, the 23rd of December, 1978. And I go, it's time for a family reunion. Like, let's go. So sure enough, as if this guy hasn't been entertaining enough to this idiot that's obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard, after Don Schischler had driven around all these Wagon Queen family trucksters from National Lampoons, he had this terrible black Suburban with a gun turret on the roof of it. And it was from some terrible, terrible Cindy Crawford, Baldwin brother bad guy movie. And this was the Russians of the bad guy car. But that was his car now. So we all get in the terrorist Suburban and head off toward Dawsonville, Georgia. And he's telling us this story that Cliff Shaw and the Shaw family live in this beautiful part of Dawsonville, Georgia, just down the street from Bill Elliott's shop. But there's a nuclear locomotive buried there. And they're the only ones that live on this street. It's either a nuclear plane or a nuclear locomotive, but it is buried at the end of Lumpkin Campground Road in Dawsonville, Georgia, and there's not very many people that live there because of this thing. And I'm like thinking, where on God's green earth is he taking us to? And he knew right where he lived. So we pull up down this hill or down this country road. I mean, you can imagine it in your mind. And up to the left was this gravel road that went up the hill toward this smaller home, but there was cars everywhere as far as the eye could see, all the way up the hill. And from make and model you can think of, older, but just what mythical junkyards are made of, and just trees growing up through them and everything. We're just looking for any remnants of the Dukes of Hazzard. We bang on the door up there. The lady comes to the door and says, hey, Cliff Shaw, blah, blah, blah. Oh, Cliff's not home from work yet. And hey, Don Schischler. And Don, on the way there, he said, look, I'm going to run traffic for you if they say it's here, and you just go walking in their yard to see if you can find this thing. We're talking acres. I decided to chime in and say, hey, we're looking for things from the Dukes of Hazzard, of all things. Remember Mr. Schischler here? He was a little family reunion there. And she goes, you looking for the old Dodge Charger car? And I'm like, she could have said a bad guy car. She could have said police car. She could have said Boss Hogg's Cadillac. She could have said anything. But yes, we are looking for the old Dodge Charger car. And she goes, if you walk back down the driveway at the second Pinto, mind you, not the first one, hang a left and start walking in toward the road. And I turned on a video camera, and there was a green 1969 Dodge Charger. And in the first episode of the Dukes of Hazzard, they jumped Lee 1 over Roscoe's police car. And of course, it didn't land well, but the body shop would remove the doors off of it because that kept them from having to paint new 01s on another car. And they remove everything that they can use, but then another episode of the Dukes of Hazzard called for a wrecked race car. So they repainted the first General Lee green and put 71s on it and put John Merende on the roof, which was the transportation coordinator. So I had just found the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard. As I walk around, and the door was welded shut on one side and gone on the other side, and it's orange where the door jamb is, and the roll cage is still mostly in it. There's a VIN number, which is XP29, blah, 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 any Dodge Charger. And there's a little bitty, label maker. It says LEE1. And then I knew I had found the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard with a Los Angeles parking sticker still on it and all these other things. What do? You are the biggest Dukes of Hazzard moron from any zip code you can come up with. So old Cliff comes home. I heard him drive past me up the driveway, and I'm down there trying to keep my tongue in my mouth going, and this thing is a disaster. It's got more pine needles on it than any national forest you can think of. The motor's in it, the transmission's in it somehow. And it's, still orange where it's supposed to be. It still has a 71. You open up the trunk, and it still has all the concrete in the trunk from when they jumped the car, because it was a big block car, and they jacked it up in the middle of the car. And, of course, the nose would be heavy, so they put quickcrete concrete in it until it leveled out, and that's how they made ballast in the back of the car. And that's how they flew the General Lees, and that's why they don't land nose first. So I go walking up the driveway, and I just can't believe, of all things, I expected a bad guy car, cooter truck, anything but the General Lee. I found the first General Lee. So Cliff was interesting. He was a very good old boy, super nice gentleman. I said, hey, Cliff, the old Dodge Charger, the green one down the street. He goes, oh, the General Lee. I'm like, oh, man. I'm thinking that's just some old wrecked race car. He knew it was the General Lee. I'm like, dang. And he goes, oh, the two Roscoe police cars are over the hill. I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Sure enough, over the hill, past the goats, Roscoe, both police cars, police 1 and 2 sitting there. I come back up, and it was getting a little dark out, and Don had his family reunion with him. He had ran the traffic like he said he was going to for me. And I said, hey, generally for sale? Like, can I take all these out of here? No, the grandson, Cliff's grandson, was into the Dukes of Hazzard. And I'm like going, yeah, but this is it is a mess. And I said, well, all right, no amount of money. And it's, Travis, you have yourself a safe drive home now, whatever. And so I knew his grandson's name, and I knew his address. So I went home and started a little plan on how on God's green earth to get this car. So every 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months, I would send his grandson something in the mail. A little 3-pack of General Lee cars, Roscoe Cooter, Enos car, whatever else. Sent it in the mail. An autographed picture from John Schneider. Sent it in the mail. I'd place a call about every 6 months, and I'd say, oh, we sure do appreciate you sending. Zach, sir, loves this, and blase that, and no problem. So after, model kits, and I just put them in the mail. I called his wife one Friday, and I said, hey, did Zach get the Daisy Jeep thing or whatever? And she said, oh, yeah, we sure do appreciate it. He's in there putting it together now, or XYZ. Finally had enough. After about 8-10 months, a year of doing this, it's time to ask if we can buy the car again. And so I said, hey, I sure would like to come down and talk to Cliff about that car. Oh, yeah, if you're ever in the area, you should come on down, stop on by. And that is my green light that someone has approved me to come down there and talk about that car. And so I immediately called friends in South Carolina, and they had a flatbed roll-off truck, and they didn't live far away. And I had another friend in Chicago. I didn't have a trailer at the time, and I said, I don't care what it takes, just get down here. And this was a Friday. And Friday turned into driving all day and night. Saturday, we pull down Lumpkin Campground Road, or where the nuclear locomotive is, and here comes Mr. Shaw down the driveway in an Astro van. And this driveway, of course, is up the hill, and it's gravel, and nothing stops well on gravel. It comes to a stop. And I said, hey, Cliff. Hey, June. I'm here to talk to you about this car. And Cliff turned into some guy I didn't know. And I yelled at me like I was his child. And I don't work on Sundays. Who told you to come down here? And I said, well, June just told me on Friday to come down. And she's like, well, yeah. And he's a very religious man, doesn't work on Sundays, not going to have anything to do with some Yankee down there cruising around his property. And I said, well, Cliff, I drove all night, and I really want to talk to you about this car. And he rolled the windows up, and he said, it's buried back there. You can see what you can do. And that was my green light. He didn't know I had a tow truck around the corner. So we moved a whole bunch of cars, and it was raining, and it was on the hill, and it was not good. And we pulled Lee 1 up on a flatbed with big old railroad ties, and got it up there and got it out and parked it there at the bottom of his driveway. And it took hours, but he was at church. I saw him coming back down the road, and I don't know if he's going to tell me to fly a kite, get this thing out of here. What are you doing on my property? And he drove right past us and up the driveway. And I'm like going, oh, Mr. Shaw is pissed off. So everybody's looking at me like, what are you going to do? You got to go talk to him, Travis. I'm like, dude, I'm this guy's, all right. So here he comes down overalls. And he said, Travis, I apologize for being so ill towards you today. The NASCAR race is on. Why don't you come up here and sit down and watch this with me, and we'll talk about that car. And he must have got some religion at church, felt bad about it. And I was like going, all right. So I'm like, I'm in Mr. Shaw's, and let's go watch a NASCAR race. And we get up there, and an outside TV, and you know, box TV, and a little picnic table. You know, after watching a couple laps of this race, I was like, you know, Cliff, I got a heck of a drive home. I said, I want to talk to you about what I'm going to give you for this car. He said, well, what do you offer me for it? Being the shrewd negotiator that I am, I handed him a pen, and I said, you write a number on your hand, and I'm going to write a number on my hand. And we're going to turn them over, and whatever we're apart, then we know where we're going to start at. And so I had three eyes looking over my shoulder on what I was going to write on my hand. And Mr. Shaw, he didn't even think about it. So I wrote $300 on my hand. He could have told him he want $30,000 for the car. I had no idea. He rolled his hand over. I rolled my hand over. He wrote $500 on his hand. So I bought the very first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard for $400. And then he said, you can have the other police cars for the same money too. So we're talking $1,200 for all of the three original police cars from the Dukes of Hazzard. So we took it home. We kept it in its green paint with the 71s, and it was known on the TV show as the Richard Petty wrecked race car. And we kept it like that for a long time. But people started picking paint off of it because they wanted a souvenir from the first General Lee, or picking the roll bar padding. You couldn't take it anywhere because it's painted with lead paint. And Dukes of Hazzard fans letting their kids climb in this thing, and just, three of them's probably dead now from being inside that thing. So it was a mess. It was very, very bad. And I had 4 Dukes collectors from Ohio contact me and said, Travis, would you sell the first General Lee? I said, you know, everything's for sale. What would you like? And they made me a good offer. I split the money, true to form, and a man of my word, with my friend from Chicago. He drove a trailer down there and made half. It was no longer my car, and I didn't have to worry about it anymore. Then another gentleman called and said, Travis, I'm in the market for a General Lee because for some reason the mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard was in Indianapolis, and my name was all over every message board, and I had found the first General Lee, and I was arranging all this stuff. But he wanted a real car. And I said, man, there were 17 real General Lees left in the world. They're all in various conditions. They're very expensive. They're very impossible to drive because this is, you know, if you want something to drive and go to your car shows, don't buy it. But he was adamant. About the same time, the guys from Ohio called back and said they'd broken up or whatever and they want to sell the car again. So I called the gentleman in Florida that wanted a real General Lee, and I said, Lee 1's for sale. And he said, give me the phone number. And he called me back. He said, I bought it. They'll have it ready for you. I've already wired their money. You just go to Ohio and pick it up. And I go, I don't want this car back. I mean, so he flew in from Florida. I went and picked the car up. We met at the Indianapolis International Airport. He came and saw what he purchased, which wasn't the greatest car in the world. It still looked exactly as it did as I found it in Cliff Shaw's yard. And I said, well, what are you going to do with this thing? He said, well, you're going to restore it. And I said, I have no desire to restore this thing. He said, Travis, if someone painted all over the Mona Lisa, someone would have to fix it. And that someone is you. And I'm like, that's pretty heavy. He took off. His plane ticket was for about 3 hours in Indianapolis to talk me into restoring the first General Lee. This car had fallen out of the sky and landed on asphalt 8,310 days before I found it. The transmission tunnel had caved over the top of itself. It was a disaster, but it still had its transmission, still had its motor, still had a lot of stuff in it. So I started writing checks, and we hired a body shop, found a completely junk but good sheet metal 69 Dodge Charger, saved what we could save off the other one. We actually had the original motor rebuilt, and then we restored Lee 1, but we didn't restore it to showroom condition. We restored it to as it appeared Saturday, November 11th, 1978, when it flew. And the decals were crooked because whoever put the decals on the door that day put them on crooked because they followed the wrong line of the car. And so we went ahead and rebuilt the car, and it ran and it drove, and it still had a cracked windshield, and it had a cracked windshield in the show, and the parking sticker was in it. And we had generally number one again on the road. The most famous car. It's on every Ertl package of it in the air. It's the only one that had chrome rocker panels for the entire show, and it's there. So we had the car, and we had it for a while. He took it back to Florida for a minute and put it in the DuPont Registry Museum down there, and just really kind of fell out of love with it. So it was time to sell it. He asked if we would represent the car again, which, we have no problem with that, and take it to Barrett-Jackson. And for those of you that have had an experience at Barrett-Jackson, oh boy. And it's going to run up on Saturday on the big night and everything else and whatever else. So my friend Jim went out there to represent the car. And he is, if not equally more knowledgeable about the Dukes of Hazzard than I am. And just a walking encyclopedia. I've learned more from him than I learned from most people that appeared on the show. He's out there representing the car, and I had to DJ. So now, when I say I had to DJ, I worked at a club called Boogie Nights for 9 years. I was a disc jockey for 26. So I have a full afro on, glasses, a Harlem Globetrotters uniform, and it's a Saturday night, and I'm looking at about 1,000 people, and I got this little TV in the DJ booth, and this car is about ready to sell. And he had called me, Jim had called me and said, there's this little guy, well-dressed, nice guy, really interested in this car. And I'm like going, I'll sell it to him, I don't care who he is. It's just, all we need is 2 people to get a bidding war on this thing. It rolls up on stage and it starts flying, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000. And this is a disc jockey and a luthier that had just restored a car, and we're up over $100,000. We have no business restoring cars. We are just Dukes of Hazzard fans. The minute it hit $110,000, it hit a wall. It was done. And they are begging for bids, like, as anybody, somebody, give me $10. Like, it was ridiculous. But there was a bid from the Skybox, and that Skybox was the eventual winner. And the minute he put his card up, everybody stopped. And they all got out of his way, and it was so weird to watch it happen. But I bought the car for $400, so I'm up to $110,000 on my $400 investment. Come to find out, it was Bubba Watson, and he does live in Scottsdale, and he's local, but a super nice guy, PGA golfer, just a terrific, terrific guy. And it couldn't have gone to a better person. A lot of people are like, Travis, aren't you upset? This thing only went for whatever, and it was on a rails. I'm a disc jockey. And a disc jockey and a luthier restored the first General Lee, and we're fans, and we just made, the car just sold for $110,000 on my $400 investment. I was dancing in the dance club like the Warner Brothers frog, like I was happy as could be. When the car left and went on, Bubba would email me back and forth just occasionally, and I sent him some videos of when we restored it and shirts and whatever else. But then he would appear on a YouTube channel or another program, and he was able to recite the history of the car. So he was a student of the car, so it couldn't have gone to a better person. And he has since restored some things or done some things to make it his car, because it is now his car, and he is allowed to do anything he wants to with it. So some things I didn't expect was the backlash from the Dukes of Hazzard fans that couldn't believe that I would destroy the first General Lee, that I was going to cut this car all up and rebody it, and it's a replica of the first General Lee, and it's no longer the first car. And I was like going, but it's running and driving on the drivetrain it flew on, and all the sheet metal on it's 1969 sheet metal. So I restored the car, but it's a replica. And so I didn't, and there was just threads and just people pissed off. And I'm like going, oh my gosh. So you remember back in the day, the Statue of Liberty had all the scaffolding all over it. They rebodied the whole Statue of Liberty, but they still call it the Statue of Liberty. So even if you restore it, it's still the same thing. We just destroyed Hollywood history, but it was my $400 investment, and they could have bought it for the same amount of money if they would have found it.
This time of year, I know a lot of us are trying to clean out our garages and maybe get rid of some things that we probably don't need. So if there's an extra set of wheels and tires sitting over in the corner, or an exhaust that you forgot to install, or a part you bought two of and forgot about that too, the best place to sell them is on ModFind. And likewise, if you're trying to find a part, new, used, aftermarket OEM for your car, truck, project, whatever, the best place to shop for those is also on ModFind. ModFind is a free app that you can download in the Android or iOS store, and that will allow you to buy, sell, transact whatever you want to do, a car, a part, a tool, anything related to the automotive hobby. It also allows you to create a listing and then add a kickback to incentivize your followers to share it with their followers. They make it very easy to share to all the major social platforms, and we'd like to thank them for their support of VINwiki this month. Please go download their app today, buy, sell your parts. A few of mine are already listed there, and it's a great platform, and I cannot wait to see where they go from here.